Hello again, my name's Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet I've Got No Rhythm. And today I'm going to try what I think is an original book tag, so bear with me. It arises from a conversation that I had on a video that Nell and Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot put out, where I think Scott described Bret Easton Ellis's book American Psycho as the most effed up book he'd ever read, and it is undoubtedly utterly effed up. For me, I don't think it's aged well. I don't think it stands up today necessarily, but when I read it over 20 years ago, even then I knew it was effed up, but I thought at least then it was saved by the humour and the satire. I don't think that's necessarily true for everybody, but it fits in with an idea of sort of effed up culture for which I would include something like from the same time period roughly is Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. I think he has an effed up sensibility which runs through a lot of his movies and is one of the reasons why they're popular. So based on that, I thought I would put together the Efftup book tag, where books can be effed up in good ways and bad ways and every way in between. And that's what I thought we'd talk about today. So prompt number one is books that are effed up in a good way. And the first one I have here is Knock and Stiff by Donald Ray Pollock. Pollock is the author of The Devil All the Time, which was recently filmed and put out on Netflix. This is a series of short stories. At the risk of quoting myself, I want to read to you what I put on my Goodreads review when I read this, and I described it as outsider fiction that includes the following: poverty, despair, drugs, violence, incest, bigotry, drugs again, drive-ins, infidelity, murder, and a lot more drugs. I described it as funny, dark, mean, bleak, and funny. It's totally effed up and highly recommended. And in the same vein of effed up in a good way, I would include something like Miami Purity by Vicki Hendricks, which is set in the heat of Miami, and a lot of sex on the beach, guns put where guns are never supposed to be put, murder, and a laundrette. Really totally effed up. Frank Bill's Donnybrook is another one. This is a lot of effed up bare knuckle boxing, sawn off shotguns, hillbilly violence, just really effed up in the most revolting and kinetic way. And then perhaps slightly more upmarket would be Daniel Woodrell's Winter's Bone. Woodrell is an amazing writer of sort of outsider fiction. I've read another trilogy of his. This was made into a movie. I think this was Jennifer Lawrence's first Oscar nomination. And this is sort of Appalachian poverty, effed up, freezing cold, just all round messed up world. Highly recommended, really brilliant. Now, effed up in a bad way, prompt number two. And for this, I've chosen Sebastian Faulk's Charlotte Gray. His previous novel was a book called Birdsong, which was utterly transcendent, just a magnificent book set in the First World War, and it still remains probably very near the top of my all-time most astonishing reads. I remember it ends, the book is set in two timelines, and the one in the First World War, we follow a guy who is in the trenches, and I think the closing scene, or a few scenes of the book, is split over this dual timeline. So in the modern timeline, a child is being born, and back in 1918, right at the end of the war, our hero has been stuck in a trench that has been blown up and collapsed, and manages to crawl out as if the earth is giving birth and giving new life to him at the same time as the child is being born. And it's beautiful, just a beautiful work. Then we came to Charlotte Gray. Charlotte Gray is set in the Second World War. Charlotte Gray is a British woman who is parachuted into Nazi-occupied France, and to work there as a spy and help the resistance. It's sub allo, if that means anything to any of you. Her sole contribution to the war effort is to learn that if you're going to dye your hair when you are a spy in Nazi-occupied France, you need to dye all your hair ooh. The reason this makes my list as effed up in a bad way is that while this is all going on, all this adventure, romance, the scene of what's going on in the Second War is being set by this totally window-dressing subplot of two Jewish boys whose parents are taken, who and they're young boys, 9 and 7, who end up being captured by the Nazis, are loaded up onto a train. The horrors of what that means to anyone, let alone these two boys who are bewildered and have nobody left to turn to. The train ends up at a concentration camp where the boys are humiliated, their suffering is unmitigated, and, spoiler alert, they die. It is utterly exploitative. It is a revolting use of the suffering of Jews as window dressing and as a side plot to a book, just to let you know how high the stakes are for poor Charlotte Gray and her dyed pubic hair. It's just a deeply, deeply unpleasant, a terrible choice, and made this book totally effed up for me. And after the transcendent experience I had with Birdsong, I'm not sure if I would be able to control myself if I ever bumped into Sebastian Faulks in real life. Number 3, name a book that everyone loved but you thought was just effed up. And if you are one of the 6 people who has not read Gone Girl, I'm going to spoil this for you as well. Here's the thing, 500 pages in, turns out they're all narcissistic sociopaths. A deeply unpleasant, deeply misanthropic view of the world, that it was page-turning, manipulative, and just effed up. Horrible. Next one, Sexy A Efftup. Prompt number 4, a book that is Sexy A Efftup. And for this, I'm going with Tampa by Alyssa Nutting. Also wins the award for the most effed up book cover. Tampa is like Lolita. It tells a story of a protagonist narrating a revolting tale of grooming and pedophilia. Unlike Lolita, this actually includes graphic sex scenes, and also, unlike Lolita, the pedophile in this story is an attractive young woman. If that wasn't effed up enough, as I say, the sex scenes are so graphic, and yet I believe for a male reader at least, tap into some well-worn, I hesitate to say primal, but some fantasy that adolescent boys have, and adolescent men probably remember, of the older, experienced, sexy woman. The sex in this is utterly unerotic, but because of that male experience that the reader may have at some point of recognizing that fantasy, I think I at least felt complicit in the revolting pedophilia involved here. I think that is entirely what the author is intending. I'd love to hear a female perspective on reading this. As I say, it's about the female gaze, it's about female sexuality, and it is a very deeply uncomfortable read in the most effed up and satisfying way. Very unsexy, but utterly effed up. And to go from there, I think the obvious choice is to look at effed up for kids. There's a long history of kids literature which is effed up. I think the very first book I was given when I started school at age 7 to read, on the first page of that book, the protagonist's parents are eaten by a rhinoceros. This was especially egregious because everyone knows that rhinoceroses are herbivorous. But later on, the boy James is involved in an accident where the 2 aunts that he's been sent to live with are crushed to death by a giant piece of fruit. James the Giant Peach is utterly effed up if you read it. Not surprisingly, I mean, it's of a piece with a lot of the work of beloved children's writer and anti-Semitic piece of trash, Roald Dahl. I'm not going to talk any more about him here. Instead, I have something else. Cautionary Verses by Hilaire Belloc a series of poems and stories written by Hele Belloc. In this instance, this edition, I've got illustrations from Quentin Blake, and they include such classics as Jim, who ran away from his nurse and was eaten by a lion, and one of my favourites is about Matilda, subtitled Matilda, who told lies and was burned to death. And it starts, Matilda told such dreadful lies it made one gasp and stretch one's eyes. Her aunt, who from her earliest youth had kept a strict regard for truth, attempted to believe Matilda. The effort very nearly killed her. Glorious stories of badly behaved children who meet the most effed up ends. Efftup Kids lit. After that, we can only go in one direction, and that is to try and find an effed up classic. And when I think of effed up classics, I only really think of one author, and that is Thomas Hardy. The first Hardy I read was Far from the Madding Crowd, where pretty early on an entire flock of sheep gets driven off a cliff. That was effed up. I'm not going to talk about Jude the Obscure, because that is too mind-blowingly effed up. What happens there with one of the most effed up lines in literature, which I can't even say out loud. If you've read Jude the Obscure, you will know exactly why Old Father Time does what he does. Totally effed up. Instead, I chose Tess the D'Urbervilles, where poor Tess is just treated utterly unreasonably. She is raped. She ends up loved, but then abandoned by her she marries another man who abandons her when he finds out, after revealing his own infidelity, and then she tells her story of what happened to her, and he is horrified and abandons her, driven back into the arms of her rapist, who treats her terribly, and just a miserable, sad, effed up story of a woman with very little agency in Victorian countryside England. Just deeply sad. I was just reading the synopsis prior to making this and started ugly sobbing at the dining room table. It was not good. Tess the D'Urbervilles, effed up classic. Next up, effed up in translation. So I was thinking of, I started thinking about The Reader by Bernard Schlink, which is one of those stories about, isn't it hard being a Nazi? And decided that was too effed up. And instead I've gone with effed up classic. This is Perfume by Patrick Suskind, translated by John E. Woods. Here we follow a young man who's Jean-Baptiste Granouille. Granouille is French for frog. And Monsieur Granouille is a perfume maker with an unparalleled olfactory acuity. Which means he's really, really good at smelling things. And he makes the most exquisite perfume, which he distills from the corpses of the people he murders. That's just the basics of the plot. It is utterly effed up, with one of the most effed up endings in literature. So that is effed up in translation. I thought I would branch out and look at some effed up non-fiction. You know, there's many effed up events throughout history that have been well documented, many effed up lives that have been written by and about the most effed up people. I've gone with a fairly recent bit of narrative non-fiction that's called 5 Days at Memorial by Sherry Fink. The 5 days in question are the 5 days following Hurricane Katrina. Memorial is the Memorial Hospital in New Orleans, where they were cut off from the rest of the world for those 5 days, where it took under 5 days to go from the highest standards of patient care to just euthanasia free-for-all. This book it's a brilliant piece of work which talks to patients, doctors, nurses, everyone involved, and points fingers, doesn't point fingers, but just an effed up response to a horribly effed up situation. I think it's a brilliant record of one of the most effed up weeks in the 21st century. I'd say, looking at the rest of the top 10, You probably got, so we have this, then we've got the first week of November 2016, and then the last 8 weeks of 2020. Pretty effed up stuff, but tremendous. Then prompt number 9, and the illustrated Efftup. So this is any book with pictures. So it can be a prose that has company pictures or a child's picture book. I've gone with not graphic novel. It says trade paperback. This was 5 comics. I've got The Boys was written over 60 issues. I've got 12. So I've got 12 of these, making up the whole 60 issues. This is written by Garth Ennis, who has plenty of effed up form. He wrote Preacher, which is effed up about God. It's drawn beautifully throughout by Derek Robertson. I can't actually show you the inside of this because I'm afraid to open up any of the panels here, because any of them may contain some of the most effed up things you've ever seen, that you would never be able to unsee, as I can never unsee them. My son read this at some point, and we've never been able to have a conversation about the things that we have both seen, which we just can't simply articulate or describe out loud, because they are beyond effed up. We're embarrassed to have read it, giggled, been shocked, been amazed, and it's just the very high. There's an Amazon TV show. They've now got 2 seasons, 8 episodes of each. It's available, based on The Boys. The Amazon show, don't get me wrong, it is plenty effed up. I think co-produced by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. They also did the Preacher TV show, so they're big fans of this story, big fans of telling stories that are effed up. It doesn't come close, no matter how effed up that show gets. It does not come close to the things that happen in the first volume of the comic book series. So that is utterly effed up, and I'm sure that you're dying for me to open up and show your panel. If you ever pick this up and look at it, you'll understand why I haven't. And lastly, prompt number 10 is titled Hanya Yanagihara's A Little Left Up, only because I think many people might bring that as an example of a book that is effed up, and I would defend it. I know people call it misery porn. To me, A Little Life is a book that is about love and kindness and friendship. The bits that remain with me years after I finished it are, for example, Jude's adoption, which I think is one of the most beautiful sequences. Again, made me ugly sob, but I think is a very special piece of work. But I'm just using this book as a prompt for something which really is misery porn, effed up misery porn, and I've chosen instead a book called The Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma, sorry, I beg your pardon, and this was shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year, 2019, I think the sticker says there, and this is about a young Nigerian man who every single decision he makes ends in catastrophe. I mean, some of his decisions are bad, none of them deserve the amount of effed up disastrousness that befalls him. Every single horrible thing that could happen to a human being happens. He makes bad choices, for sure, but this is effed up beyond any sense of... It just effed up to the point where it was no longer enjoyable. This is a 500-page book. I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning to finish this. Not because I was enjoying it, but because I couldn't bear the idea that I would have to wake up the next day and read more of it. So literally read the last 400 pages in one sitting. It is beyond effed up. It is utterly misery porn. And read it at your peril. And that is my effed up book tag. Anybody who would like to do this, who's read books that are effed up, is invited to do it. I'm going to tag 3 people who just simply been foolish enough to engage with me in the time that I've been on BookTube. So thank you everybody who has commented and responded so far and watched and liked the video. And these 3, I'm going to put you in at Nell and Scott, obviously at Gunpowder fiction and plot, because you were the inspiration for this. I'm going to tag also Mark Nash and Kieran at Lady Books. Thank you very much. Have fun.